So I almost came into this review with a fairly negative outlook on the album, but I somehow ended up doing a Mike Seatown on this one because my last listen of the album ended up clicking with me, and I started to see the appeal in this one quite a bit. So like previous Big Thief albums, this new one is getting a lot of rave reviews from music publications. Previously, I've never really been a fan of Big Thief, unfortunately. I've always found them a bit too scarce with their sound. There's very little going on in their songs, though Adrian Lenker as a performer never really quite gripped me. And those critiques I just gave there are actually indicative of what's going on this new album here as well, U.F.O.F. Like, there isn't really much progression in Big Thief's sound. Adrian's delivery is fairly similar to what she's always been doing with her vocals on previous albums as well. But I don't know, I think I've just begun to appreciate this one for what it is. There are so many lovely guitar melodies on this one that I absolutely cannot deny. And perhaps it's because the weather is a bit grey at the moment over in the UK that I'm just really seeing the appeal of these kind of like slowcore, sluggish instrumentals. Maybe that could be it. Obviously, mood and atmosphere is always a factor into how you enjoy your music. But at the same time, I don't know, man. I mean, Cattails and Orange, they sound lovely as fuck. The guitar on these tracks are to die for. The way of vocals just float over the instrumental too. It really is quite gorgeous. Orange has this very light guitar plucking. It's so faint in its sound, and yet it actually has quite an impact on the way the song sounds, actually, because I think Adrian's vocals here just don't sound like as nondescript as I've always thought they have. Like, I actually feel as though she's sounding very emotive here. Just this very traditional singing tone on this track, which sounds like a huge throwback to like 70s era singer-songwriters, which I actually really dig here. I really like the lyrics on this track too as well, where she's talking about the death of someone that she loves and she's mourning the death of that person on this track. And then the second verse as well, where she's talking about closing her eyes and counting to 10 and wondering if she's able to actually just open her eyes again. And she just needs that reassurance of like being able to open her eyes and things being okay and not mourning that death anymore, but there isn't really a way to do that. And that essentially ties into the theme of this album, which is mostly about Adrian dealing with loss and how life kind of just moves on so quickly, and throughout life you're essentially just losing people, or people are moving on continuously. On the track U.F.O.F, she's talking about the disappearance of a friend of hers, but I would say it's definitely deeper than just a friendship. It certainly sounds more like a deep love that she's talking about here. She talks about how this person will never return again, just like a UFO, and I do really like the metaphor here about linking this into a UFO, because like with a UFO, you convince yourself that something is there, but maybe, just maybe, you're just seeing things or you're believing things that aren't true. And just like with this person that she's truly in love with, maybe she's convincing herself that yes, there's still hope in this. There's still hope that this love is still here, but they're not. Which is very, very deep and depressing when you think about it. But I don't think this album is exactly here to put you in a good mood. At times on this album, I do really dig the slowcore elements, especially on a track like Centuries, where here there's very little going on musically, but it actually works in its favor because I think Adrian puts in a good enough performance vocally to keep me quite gripped to the track here. But I must say, I do definitely prefer the tracks that have a bit more added instrumentation to them, like a track like Strange, which I think has a nice little beat to it. And again, the guitar on this track is really lovely. There's more of a shoegaze aesthetic on the track Jenny, which I don't actually think works in the band's favor here at all. This has got to be the worst vocal performance on the whole album, I think, and I don't know, the repetition of Jenny gets really, really irritating. While I'm on the topic of negatives, I may as well bring up the fact that I do think a lot of these lyrics do end up being quite vague throughout. Like, you look at a track like Betsy, and you can't really take away anything from it. Even a track like Jenny as well, which you definitely could tie into the theme of the album, but honestly, it's just a little too vague to kind of pull anything from it. So while there are great moments on this album, it is tedious at points, I must say, especially with some of the slower moments which don't really have much of a bite to them or anything going on at all really. But even with that said though, there are so many great highs in this album, like I mentioned with already, like Cattails, the instrumental on that one. It gets really great towards the end. Orange is a great track. There are so many great tracks on here that it just does end up being a good album overall. Definitely the best album I've heard from Big Thief so far, and yeah, I guess I'm gonna go 6 out of 10. I think this is actually pretty good. Definitely the best album I've heard from Big Thief so far, and yeah, I guess I'm gonna go 6 out of 10. I think this is actually pretty good.